Hello my loves and welcome back to my channel. Most of you thought I was gone, never to make a return, and I can't really blame you. It's been a really long time. I know consistency has never been my game, and it's been especially bad right now. I'm trying to juggle 3 jobs because I'm trying to move to New York, and that takes a lot of money. And as a person with limited energy reserves, I don't really have much room for anything else except just surviving and, you know, having a good marriage and, you know, eating well and good quality of life. But please rest assured that I love you very much and that I will continue making videos. So given this festive season, which right now I speak to you still from Los Angeles, it is a little cold and a little crisp and a little festive. I thought it would be nice to spend my first video coming back, or whatever that means, talking about food. And that's because food is something that I really closely associate with the festive season, and anything to do with the festive season really. Obviously Christmas is centered around a lot of delicious eating, but also it's the context in which you get to see your family or your friends, or even eat on your own sometimes. And there are loads of festive traditions associated with food. And any of you who know me or who've watched me for long enough know that I am a massive foodie. So I thought I would bring you some of my recent or favorite books about food. It's a bit of a mix. The first book I have to talk to you about, most of you probably know already, but if you don't, I'm really excited to bring it onto your radar because it has been one of my favorite books. I think I read it at the end of 2017 or beginning of 2018. I can't quite remember when it was published, but I read it quite close to publication, and that is Eat Up by Ruby Tandoh. This is, well, Ruby Tandoh is nation's sweetheart of Bake Off fame, and quite apart from the fact that she was adorable and fantastic in Bake Off when she was on, she has also become a really well-respected name in food writing. And I would say that that's because she understands something very important about food, and that is its intersectionality and the fact that really it is at the center of most cultural conversations. And the way that we talk about food and the conversations that we have around food are often kind of reflective of like a larger cultural conversation that we're having, which is super interesting. It's kind of like, I think about it as a microcosm of the macrocosm, and I think that is really interesting, and I think that's why I love to read about food, and I find it endlessly educational. This book is basically an answer to clean eating culture, I would say. Tandoh is a pretty outspoken critic of this kind of wave of clean eating culture that we've been dealing with for the past few years, which is like, here's a way to eat clean and cleanse your body and remove toxins and all this bullshit, because you have a liver to remove toxins and no smoothie diet is going to do that for you. And a lot of us have kind of lost the ability to eat intuitively and eat what we want, because we're being told left, right and center what to eat, what's good for us, what's not good for us, what's going to kill us, what's going to cause us cancer. And it's all just a bit exhausting. And I think most of us have lost the ability to have any kind of coherent understanding of like what we love and when we should indulge our cravings, and you know, when we should maybe be a bit more careful, and how to listen to our bodies. And she speaks a lot in retaliation to that. And so the glorious thing about this book is that it doesn't tell you to do anything. It's not prescriptive in the slightest. And in fact, my favorite food writing is not prescriptive, because I have absolutely no time for being told what to eat. As a person who likes all manner of things, sometimes I like a lot of healthier things, but I've got a massively sweet tooth. And sometimes, you know, at 2 in the morning when there's nothing else and I fancy some fried chicken, I will gladly eat some fried chicken. And as I say, it's kind of a vehicle, this book, for her to talk about all the things that food intersects with, and I think we don't have enough of that. So how does food intersect with race? How does it intersect with culture in general? How can we improve the conversations around eating disorders? And notably too, how does food intersect with class, which is super important, because a lot of food writing and like food media in general, like the TV shows we see and stuff, are generally geared towards a more upper class audience, let's just say. Like, you're just expected to have saffron in your kitchen, you're expected to go to these smart restaurants, and you're expected to understand that a small portion of whatever you're eating is the best portion, and all these kind of really haughty ideas about food. And she basically just has a lot of really interesting things to say about how our current cultural understanding of food has kind of affected the way that we understand those intersections. And I found it so fascinating. It's well researched and clever without being inaccessible or too highly academic. She talks about some lovely things just to break up the kind of like cultural conversation a bit, and you know, things like food and film and where food interacts with other kind of media. And I don't know, it's just a massively intersectional book, and it made me hungry. And just the way she talks about food and the allowances that you can give yourself to just love any kind of food you want, whether that's like a 1p Freddo, or maybe like £2 now with inflation, or a more like 3 Michelin star meal. And there's just something for everyone in there. And I like to read everything she reads. She has some long reads on The Guardian and Vice, which I think are super interesting too, which I will link below. If it has not been on your radar, I would 100% recommend it. The only thing slightly missing, I would say, and I read it a while ago, and I think there was maybe 1 or 2 mentions of disabled people, but I'm not entirely sure. And I have this weird memory, you know, when you have like weird disembodied memories that you're not sure that you dream, if you dream them. But years ago, I think I was listening to like a Radio 3 or Radio 4 program with some disabled people about a disabled cookbook and like ways and things that you can cook if you're disabled, or if you have physical limitations that stop you from cooking like an able-bodied person would. And if that doesn't exist, and if someone wants to go in on that with me, I would 100% be willing, because I am super obsessed with food and super obsessed with food combinations. But until I have my own place and an actual accessible kitchen, it's going to be very difficult for me to engage in the actual physical act of cooking. And I would love to see more conversation around that, like where we fit in, the people who love food and love to make recipes but don't necessarily live in a world that makes that accessible to us. And that was kind of missing for me. Even though Ruby Tandoh is not disabled, it would have been cool if she'd like maybe spoken to someone with a disability for the writing of her book, just because like she covered so many other intersectionalities. The next book is Home Cooking by Laurie Colwin. Now, Laurie Colwin was a really famous American food writer. She wrote a bunch of novels, and then she kind of transitioned into food writing. And she died very early, when she was 45, very suddenly, and was a great loss to American culture. Home Cooking is kind of considered her like seminal collection of essays, and it was republished in 2012. It was originally written in the mid-80s. I would say it's kind of a mix of anecdotes and recipes and general like tidbits of knowledge for the basic cook. So the reason why I like it so much is, number one, it's ridiculously funny. She's really incisive and witty and just really funny, like laugh out loud funny, and I don't laugh very often at books. But it's just hilarious, her turns of phrase, and it's really economical in language. But I think the greatest thing about it is that it hones in on this fact that most of the people who love food in the world love it because to some degree it makes them nostalgic, and the idea that for almost every period of your life and for almost every food that you could name, there's some kind of story associated with it. So, you know, this kind of amalgamation of like storytelling and food is something that I find really interesting, and I would love to read or see or even write a kind of like food memoir. What are the foods that accompanied you during different periods of your life? And for me, this is kind of approaching what home cooking is, because the way that Laurie Colwin tells stories is really lovely and warm and inviting, but also it's kind of showing food as this thread in her life that has followed her and that has led her inevitably to the type of food writing that she did. Now, one thing I would say to bear in mind is it was written in the 80s, so you can see that in multiple different ways. Some of the recipes seem to be a bit dated, and it's definitely for the more basic cook, so it's nothing very fancy, and some of the recipes are super simple. And some of them, you know, not particularly appetizing just because tastes have changed, but some are really appetizing. But also just in the way that she writes, there are some things that probably wouldn't fly today in 2018 because, you know, ways that we talk about certain things have changed, and that's okay and that's normal. But I just think that you should go into it understanding the time period in which it was written, and it's so sad that she died so early, because I think it would have been really interesting to see what kind of voice she would have been on the food scene now. But it kind of reminds me of like a Julie and Julia type situation, and she has a bit of Nora Ephron in her. I just really like it, and I think that if you like food and you like to read anything you can about it, and especially you like to see how people can craft stories around another craft, which is cooking, then I think you would enjoy it. The third book is the last non-fiction of the lot, and that is How to Eat by Nigella Lawson. Now, who doesn't love Nigella Lawson? And again, this is one of her seminals. It's much older, one of her first, if not her first, and I just love it. To me, you can read it like a bedtime book, even though it's technically a cookbook and a recipe book. But I think one of the things for me that Nigella hones in on, and still does now in 2018, is the fact of food as pleasure, and the fact that one shouldn't be embarrassed to view food as one of the great pleasures of life, and particularly as a female pleasure. And a lot of the world seems to take great glee in removing pleasures for women, or making them feel airy-fairy or bimbo for liking certain things. And so I really love Nigella for the emphasis she puts back on the fact that you're allowed to love whatever you love, and you're allowed to get super enthusiastic about food, and it's kind of allowed to be this carnal thing, and that it matters and that it's important and that everyone should enjoy it. And I think How to Eat was the kind of beginning, or at least to me it felt like the beginning of that kind of exploration of it, without it being haughty. She always says she's not a chef, and she doesn't want to talk down to people, and she just wants to teach people how to enjoy food and how to, as I say, really take pleasure. It's hilarious to me because the Goodreads reviews of this, a lot of people are like, why are there no pictures? You know, when I want to cook from it, I can't see the pictures of what it's supposed to look like, which is such a hilarious image to me of how we've moved on in life. A lot of cookbooks didn't used to have pictures, and that used to be okay. And personally, I didn't really miss the pictures. In fact, I kind of liked it because it just means you can read it like a novel. And to me, the way that she talks about food, and the way that her enthusiasm is so infectious, and the way that it's so warm and so familiar and so familial, does mean that it can be read like a novel. So that didn't bother me at all. Again, like some really simple recipes, and not always like separated from the rest of the text. So if you do want to cook from it, you kind of have to be a bit careful to like find the recipe. But I just think it's glorious, and I support most anything that Nigella does, and I just love her attitudes. And I think that if we could take from Ruby Tandoh and take from Laurie Colwin and take from Nigella in our attitudes about food, and come away from this kind of like sanitized good and bad view that we have of it, then we'd all be much better off. Quick disclaimer, I know so much that this is so hard for people who've had eating disorders. I've had people in my life who've struggled with those things, and I can't imagine how hard it is to just have that level of basic need and necessity so corrupted, and you know, for the way you think about food to just be so complicated and so cruel. But my heart goes out to anyone who's struggled with that stuff, and I think the things that I've recommended so far, one of the reasons why I like them is they speak about food in a way that to me feels non-judgmental and doesn't place a value system on different types of food and different ways of eating and different cultural practices. And I think that's so different than people like, well, probably not going to mention names, people who do place a value system on that stuff, people who can be damaging for, you know, those of us who might struggle at periods in our lives to think about food in a way that is healthy and kind to ourselves. But yeah, I understand how difficult it is, and you know, if you don't feel safe reading about food or ingesting media about food, then I wouldn't. The last one is a novel, and that is a YA novel called Big Bones by Dockrill. This was highly recommended by the wonderful Lauren over at Lauren and the Books. Sorry, I've got itchy nose syndrome, which is a thing that is unique to filming a video. What happens is you turn on the camera, your nose is fine, and then it starts itching for the duration of your video, and then you turn off the camera and then it's fine again. It's a weird thing. Anyway, Big Bones by Dockrill. Now, this is the only fiction book of the bunch, and it is about a 16-year-old named Bluebell who is having some health problems, and she is a bit overweight. In fact, she calls herself fat and reclaims that term, and she is told by her doctor to keep a food diary for, I believe, an entire year, to kind of think about her relationship with food and keep a handle on what she's eating. So basically the structure of the book is that each chapter is the name of a food. So I think you have avocado, I think you have a lot of different types of sweet, like cake, and that's kind of a way in which she can tell her story and navigate the perils of teenagehood. I loved this book for a load of different reasons, especially in its own context as a YA novel. I think it's really evangelical almost about body positivity and about understanding that your body is your own and that you can feel how you want about it, and that it's not anyone else's job to police your body. And I think that's super important in the context of YA literature, because obviously, you know, teenagehood is a time of struggle for a lot of people, and I think a positive role model to uphold for those kids is a really good thing. And the fact that, you know, her relationship with her body is complex. Sometimes she likes being fat, sometimes she doesn't, sometimes she struggles with it, sometimes she doesn't, and her relationship with food kind of changes throughout the novel. I also loved it for its descriptions of food, which I thought were lovely and, you know, made you want to eat, and also made you understand that sometimes a personal relationship with food is a complicated one. I thought the voice was really funny and really sweet, and the whole thing just felt warm in a way that I feel that most YA novels should. I will say that there is a plot point, I don't want to spoil it, but something happens to a member of Bluebell's family, and some of the discourse around that was a little problematic to me as a disabled person. Let me just say that. But I also think that it probably kind of made sense in the context of like a slightly self-centered 16-year-old girl voice. So I don't bemoan it too much, but you know, all worth knowing as you go in. And that for my food books, for now at least, because I'm sure that I'll read more in 2019. I almost said 2018 then. Maybe I've erased the dumpster fire that is 2018 from my brain entirely. That would be nice. That is it though, those 4 books. I really hope that you got something from this video, even if you've already read the books. I hope that I maybe shared some of your opinions. I would love to have a conversation down in the comments about any food books that you might have loved, novel or otherwise. And I plan to sit down again and film tomorrow so I can get back to you pretty fast. But in the meantime, thank you so much to those of you who sat through this video even after such a long time. Thank you to everyone's wonderful comments on my video with Philip, which was my previous video. I think it'll probably be a year until I get him in front of the camera, but he did have fun. As much as he said he didn't, he did have fun, and I thought it was a wonderful video. It was just so fun to shoot, and a lot of you seem to like him as a character, so that makes me happy. Anyway, I love you all. Please let me know what you're reading. I have been reading like a maniac because it's the only thing that helps me take my mind off it. That and MasterChef The Professionals, and also the awful series of The Apprentice that is on right now. But yeah, I have loads and loads of books to talk to you about, to the point where I'm super overwhelmed by it. So I don't even know, like, I'll probably categorize them in a weird way. But I hope you guys are all having a wonderful run up to Christmas, and I will speak to you very, very soon, probably in less bright of a color. In the meantime, keep safe, keep happy, and happy reading. Bye. Adios.